It's very important that I make it clear tonight that I'm not speaking simply from the perspective of a Christian minister, which I am. More importantly, I'm addressing these issues as a concerned citizen, a citizen of a nation founded and built on the solid foundation of 5 institutions created by God for the betterment of all mankind. And by institution, I mean a custom, a practice, a relationship, or a behavioral pattern of importance in the life of a community or society. If you recall, these vital institutions are human freedom, sanctity of life, marriage, the family, and the nation. I believe that God designed these institutions to benefit all human societies and perhaps to ensure their survival. History demonstrates that even some of the most primitive cultures were able to function and survive because they practiced and preserved at least some of these institutions. And I'm concerned because I see the constant and alarming erosion of our nation's foundation through the destruction of these essential societal institutions. That's why I believe that we're witnessing America's decline and perhaps her fall. Tonight, let's examine the vulnerability of these institutions and assess the damage each has sustained and the danger that is posed to our nation. For the first divine institution is each person's right to freedom of choice and the subsequent responsibility incurred by those choices. America's Declaration of Independence was based on a recognition of the divine institutions. It says, "We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain inalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness." The founders of the United States of America were not all Christians, but they all recognized the divine institutions established in the Bible. The right to life is based on the divine principle of the sanctity of life. The right to liberty and the pursuit of happiness reflects the divine institution of freedom of choice. And it's critical to note that this freedom is granted by God. This is why the United States of America has been a unique nation among all other nations. It's the only nation that acknowledges that liberty is not bestowed by the government, but by the Creator God. Thus, it cannot be taken away by the government. This is the first time a nation other than Israel has sought to incorporate the social applications of biblical principles. Man has the freedom from God to choose his own destiny. Too often in our world, man has forfeited his freedom in exchange for a government's promise of perpetual security. The more services a government supplies, the more of our freedom it demands in return. But this institution also recognizes the corollary truth that freedom of choice demands personal responsibility for those choices. Man is warned by God that he must take personal responsibility for his wrong choices. He cannot blame the consequences of wrong choices on someone else or the circumstances of his environment. After man's fall, his nature is to avoid taking responsibility for his or her choices. Today's society is heavily influenced by the idea, spawned by psychology industry, that most of our problems can be traced to the wrong influences exerted by our parents and environment. Thus, the consequences of wrong choices are often blamed on an unpleasant childhood or environment. Our judicial system has been, in large measure, rendered ineffective by this thinking. Murderers are not really guilty because they were raised in unhealthy environments. I think of one particular case, the trial of the 9/11 co-conspirator Moussaoui. One of the jurors voted to release him or acquit him because he was beaten by his father in his childhood. And thus, he was justified in killing innocent Americans, or at least plotting to do so. Abusers are simply exhibiting learned behavior according to this kind of thinking. It's based on their childhood experiences. Celebrity criminals are said to be forced into crime by their loss of privacy and their sense of need to regain control over their lives. Well, you get the picture. Marriage is another of God's divine institutions. It's under max attack from several directions. One recent study revealed that divorce rates increased a staggering 2,000% from the late 19th century until the beginning of the 21st century. There are many studies on the causes of such dramatic increases, but one fact has become obvious. Divorce is now more of a probability than an exception to the rule. In the United States, from 1990 to 2002, there was an average of 47% of all marriages ending in divorce. The impact of this tragedy on the decline of our society is tremendous, particularly as it affects our children, that core unit of any civilization, the family. One thing is certain: divorce wreaks havoc on both parties and all concerned, whether they realize it or not. The 1960s sexual revolution brought a devastating decline in morality. All forms of entertainment industry have increasingly treated divorce and sexual promiscuity as a normal fact of life. Some movies and television shows create the impression that viewers have missed out on something that would enhance their lives if they haven't had an illicit affair. This is especially true in the impressionable minds of the young teenagers. What is viewed as the norm in the movies and TV today would have been unimaginable in the 1950s. There's no question that these factors have impacted the divorce rate. One resulting consequence is that marriage has been simply bypassed by many. A growing number of Americans live together without the bond of marriage. These couples experience an even greater breakup rate than married couples. Their relationships are inherently unstable because there are no commitments made that can withstand the normal stresses of two people living together in our high-pressure world where both partners are usually pursuing separate careers. Record numbers of children are born out of wedlock, especially to teenage parents. Abortion has become a means of birth control for some. And then there's the impact of growing homosexual influence in our society. Now let me try to make this clear. I'm not talking about whether to tolerate or accept homosexual behavior. I'm talking about condoning those behaviors by officially changing our long-standing laws. Society can and does accept the presence of certain behavior as a fact of life without sanctioning it or institutionalizing it. Thus, the acceptance of homosexual unions for humanitarian reasons is not the same as legislating them into an officially sanctioned lifestyle. Formal recognition of a gay marriage by a government implies society's seal of approval. When a government enacts such a law, it invariably promotes that conduct. The historic God-ordained purpose of marriage between a man and a woman is to sustain and replenish a society's population. Same-sex marriage defeats that intended purpose. Why would any sane society deliberately approve and thus promote a practice that, if widespread, guarantees the demise of the society? This kind of law essentially approves and institutionalizes societal suicide. As a result of these attitudes, many European countries and the liberals in America are in effect legislating and aborting themselves out of existence, especially at a time when Muslims and other immigrant groups are determined to gain political dominance through population growth. In summary, a committed and enduring relationship between a man and a woman is the most essential building block of any society. When this institution breaks down, the society begins to unravel.